2015 Jinma 254 with the lovely Perkins. Brakes are shot, completely gone. I don't know if it's because of the seals leaking and then the friction discs are just saturated with oil. There's a little drain plug on the area of the cylinder there, or the housing rather, where the brakes are, which is on the right side of the tractor, which is right here. That's not helpful. Which is right here. So the fender needs to come off. This platform, you know, I have to pull some small stuff off here, get this out of the way. Anyway, this all has to come out of the way. I'll have to pull the hydraulic filter. I'm going to remove the pipe anyway that goes to the pump because I want to machine that. It's leaking a little bit where the O-ring is on the face of the where it meets the pump. So again, this is the right side, so all that has to come off. I've never done this before, but this is what I was told by the folks at Jinma. And yeah, same thing on the left side now. I need access to this. And yep, all that stuff needs to come off. And these are the friction discs. I think there's 2 per side per the schematic. A couple of seals and a couple of seals for the actuating rod that pushes on them. And I think there's some bearings, and there's a essentially like a pressure plate with a ramp. And I think when you step on it, this twists, rides the ball bearing face, and then pushes out, kind of like a slipper clutch, maybe. Anyway, I'll figure out when I get in there. I ended up pulling the 4 bolts on either side of the axle. And the outside bolts secure the fenders, and the inside bolts essentially secure the ROPs. And then the 4 bolts on the side there, those essentially tie the ROPs to the fender. So I'm supporting it, obviously, under that jack there, and then I'm also securing it up top using the lift. So it's essentially about an inch or so above the axle, so I can simply roll the tractor back and forth. So here you can see it's not sitting in the axle, and then once I get the floorboard out, I'll have easy access to this area to start working on the brakes. So next stop is going to be getting out the floorboards on both sides, and at that point I should have good access to the brakes. The floorboards are out. This is the right side. Right side had 4 bolts, and a couple of springs for the brake pedal, and brake pedals, and yeah, just this this throttle is ganged with that cable there. These 2 are ganged, and when you pull the slack adjuster off, it comes right out. So good access to the brake chamber now. I think I'm going to pull the wheel because it'll just give me a little more room. It's a bit of a 90 as it is now. You know, you have to fit in there, and it's probably not going to be that comfortable. And that way, if I need to bring tools in straight in, it'll just be easier. So I think I'm going to pull the wheel and pull the wheels on both sides. So that's the right side. Left side was pretty much the same things. 3 bolts, spring for the clutch, and the you know, it has a safety switch for the clutch. So no big deal, pretty much the same thing, slightly different. Same thing over here though in terms of the clearance. So anyway, next stop, pull the wheels, and should be able to get busy with the brake chambers at that point. Took the wheels off, and now there's really good access straight to the brake chamber. So piece of cake. The The Robson fender is supported by that set of jack stands, and then there's another set of jack stands that are there to really just catch the axle, but there's a flat machined into the bottom of the transmission housing, so I'm just pushing on that. I'm going to start getting into this cover now. These are 16 millimeter, and let's take a look inside, see what we got. Okay, I'm going to loosen this, but leave it in place so the plate doesn't want to fall. This brake is supposed to be a dry setup, not wet, so that inner seal on the shaft presumably is leaking like a sieve. I want to replace this boot as well, so I think I'm just going to take this section off, take that nut off, and then this should be able to just slide off, and then when this actuates, it pulls it forward. If you step on the brakes, and you can see that maybe you can't, that this is moving outward. So I think there's that ball bearing ramp mechanism, so when you pull the pedal forward, yeah, maybe you can see it now. Let me push the lever here. Sorry, it's not good. Let me do it again from here. Anyway, that's coming outward. So presumably it just splits this friction disc comes out and then rubs on that plate. And then I assume the other friction disc goes the other way and hits it. So this is easy to get apart. I just attached that linkage from there. There's a cotter pin. And then this essentially like a little cam mechanism in here. And this comes off as a unit. And I'm going to take these two bolts out, take this off, and I'm pretty sure when I do that I should be able to pull this entire assembly out. I'm not 100%, but there should be enough room there to just come out at an angle and pull it with the pin intact. And then I'm going to replace that boot as well. This has a gasket that holds it in place. Sorry, it doesn't hold it in place, but there's a gasket between these two pieces, I'm pretty sure. That's going to get replaced. Let's see. I just put the bolt back in, that way I could tap on it to get it loose. I should be able to pull this out. The boot might fight a little bit on the rod. Nope, it's coming right off. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that piece is there. Now I'm thinking this is just going to come out as a unit. Let's get this out of here. Let's get friction disc number one out of the way. Oh, I see. So this is probably the inner friction surface, yeah, for both sides. Okay, let's see if I can get this out. I might have to pull that rod. In fact, I think I will. It's just a cotter pin. It's just this rod right here. Get that out and it should come right out. So once this inner cotter pin is removed, then this should just slide out. And the linkages on the ramp assembly there, I think they're kind of fixed, so this really only goes back in one way with these two linkages maintaining the spacing. So let's pull the rod. Keep that like that. And I get the boot out. I'm going to put all these in the parts washer, get them super clean, and I think at this point we should be able to just pull this out. Yeah, it's coming as a unit. That's good. Sorry, folks, I have the tripods. Okay, good. So there's the other friction. And the other friction is on the back. I was able to get the C-clip off. I'm going to get this out of the way and then pull those 4 bolts and should be able to get this housing off. So I got the outer housing off. And get that cleaned up. Get that surface, clean up that surface for the friction side too. So this is the seal. I might pull this out, I might not. It might be easier to get the seal off, but you can see, I think I know why it's leaking so bad on this side. There's not much of a gap here in the seal here, but if you look down here where it's leaking, you can see it's quite a bit off that face. It's pretty close up here, so I think whoever installed it just smashed it in and didn't care about it. On the right side of the tractor now, and what a difference. The right side is virtually no oil at all. I mean, there was a little bit, but the friction disc itself and the brake is almost completely dry. Yeah, so it's really just that left side that was leaking like the Valdez. This side looks pretty good. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to treat them the same. I'm just going to do the same on this side, put the frictions on, change the seal. Yeah, the seal is much better. It is slightly offset on the bottom relative to the top, just like the left side. But yeah, it's not leaking nearly as much. Got the housing off, and yeah, all looks good. Just gonna clean it up. One thing I noticed on both sides with both frictions is that the rivet heads face inward on both sides. I don't know if it's important to the stack. Probably not, but that's just something I noticed how it's assembled. That these rivet heads that you can see in the center there, they face inward towards the plate. Yeah, same thing. On the left side, I got both seals out. These seals are stacked like this, so there's one pushed way in, there's another one that is more flush with this face, although this one was pushed in pretty far and was leaking like a sieve, so I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure why it was leaking so much compared to the other side, which wasn't leaking nearly at all. It looks like one of these faces on the, yeah, it kind of looks like it tapers. I'm not exactly sure. No, I guess probably not. Anyway, when they're both in, I noticed there's a gap on the outside. It's true of the other side of the tractor too. There seems to be a gap on this outer seal on the outer face. Like there's a gap between it and the surface on this this sort of collar that rides in here. Let me show you what I mean. Anyway, I'm not sure if that gap is there by design or not, but regardless, even, I mean, there's probably, in a minimum, there's 2 faces that are touching if it's tapered in some way, or 3. So if the outer lip here on the inner and the outer isn't touching, then you'd have at least 2. And if the outer on the inner is touching, you'll have at least 3, right? You'd have the inner one, 1, 2, and then the second one, the inner lip. Yeah, not sure, but not that important. I'll just, I'm going to replace both of these anyway. And then there's also the collar, and this is what the ID of the seals ride on. And as I said, there was a gap between the outside. If you look at the outer seal and the outer lip, there's a gap, a visible gap, and you can see it on this side and the other side. So I'm guessing there's at least 2 to 3 parts of that seal that are touching when they're both in there. Anyway, this collar, the first thing that goes in is this O-ring, and this O-ring rides in that inner groove here. So that O-ring goes on that, and then this collar comes and rides over that O-ring, presumably to seal it. I'm going to replace this because the inside's pretty worn, and I'm wondering if that's making it wobble a little bit. And if it, say, I don't know, hypothetically, if it was not perfectly straight and was wobbling a little bit, it might actually be opening up that lip as it sort of wobbles around. But these are all pretty cheap, so I'm going to replace that O-ring. I'm going to replace this, and I'm also going to replace the C-clip that comes in last to bolt this in place. So there's the O-ring. This gets pushed, the collar gets pushed over the O-ring, and then this C-clip locks it in place there. So I got the outer seal out already. I just thought I'd talk a little bit about how I'm getting them out. There's lots of different ways to do it. You can use tools like, I'm using like a conventional sort of seal puller. I've seen guys beat them to hell, and then they deform so bad you can then just put a screw into the metal bit and pull it out. I mean, there's all kinds of conventional and non-conventional ways of doing it. But what I do is I use a small screwdriver, and I put just a slight bend in it. It's probably not even detectable, but it kind of arcs this way, like outward. So when I stick it, there's like this seal part where you're up against the metal part of the seal, and then it's just all rubber, right? So that allows you to get the seal puller in there. I try and deform this, or just actually kind of get it to rip off if possible. It just makes it easy to get the seal puller in there. But anyway, that gap you can exploit, right? You can then come in with the seal puller. I use the short side. It'll fit in there. You probably might not be obvious, but it fits in there, and you can then sort of get behind the seal and just twist it a little bit so you're pulling on the metal. And of course, I'm riding up against this bit, which is going to be replaced anyway, so if it gets chewed up a little bit, it doesn't really matter. If you're trying to protect it, you just, do it a little more gingerly, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, once I get this in place, I'll show you me pulling it up. Short side, longer side. If you opt to use the longer side, it's fine, I guess, provided you don't arc it into the metal out here, right? You don't want this long edge to come from behind and then start digging into that edge over here, right? Because if this long edge starts digging into this face, we're going to have to seal that somehow when you put the new seal in. It's not the end of the world, but there's no point in needlessly digging up this OD. So just be mindful of, how much of this tool you need, and don't let it arc out into scratching the OD, and then also on this other side of the tool, then going in and, maybe cracking the housing or doing something like that. So, I mean, small stuff might be inevitable just based on your situation, but to the extent you can not scratch up and start digging holes into this housing piece, the better. So I use the short side, and it tends to end up, like, I just adjust it, so I'll go through, and then I'll get behind the metal, and I'll kind of just visualize where I'm about midway on the seal, on the metal bit, and then try and arc it just against the seal itself. And if you can't, then just put something between the housing and just put something between the top of the tool and the housing so that it's not, cracking that. Again, if it happens, not the end of the world. There's stuff you can get gasket sealer and put it on behind the, just put it on the face between the housing and the seal itself, and that'll seal it up. But again, there's no point in creating extra work. I'm on the left side of the tractor. I received the new O-ring, which I've put on. That's the new O-ring in place right now. And I received a new sleeve. This is a bit tight going on. I don't know if it's a slip fit, press fit. I don't know how they put this on at the factory. So I'm going to heat this up. I'm going to heat it up in the little oven and see if I can get this to open up a little bit. And at that point, it should slip right on, get it to slip over the O-ring, and it'll be ready for the seals. So I was able to get the sleeve, heated it up for maybe 10 minutes or so, and was able to get it. I had to tap it on with a punch, like the blunt end of a punch. I didn't want to chew this up, so it was pretty wide surface area. I was able to tap this on, just, you know, just using like a cross pattern. So walked it over the O-ring, and now I just need to put this C-clip on, and this retains, it grabs that groove in the shaft, and then we'll retain the sleeve from backing out. By the way, to do this job, there's no reason to remove this hub assembly. And if you do, then the whole transmission will have to be disassembled. So there's no reason to take this out. Even if you were to replace the bearing, there's another C-clip inside there, a larger C-clip. Right there, you might be able to see one side of it. You would take this C-clip. To do that, you would, if you needed to replace that inner bearing, pull the C-clip, pull the sleeve, pull the O-ring probably, then pull the that larger C-clip in there, and then at that point you'd be able to get something on or around the bearing, and then just pull that bearing out as well. So that stays on always. These are the 4 seals that are going on the 2 axles for the brakes. I like to retain this spring in here. I like to fill this up with grease all around. I usually do this with all seals. It just helps keep that spring from popping off while you're tapping it in. So I'm just going to fill those in with some grease, all 4 of them. And then if there's any small imperfections in the housing where the seals are going, I like to put just a tiny bit of the gasket cinch. Essentially just a gasket material, but works really well for filling in little imperfections in the middle, is to take up any space for the OD of the seal. So yeah, that's it. And then once these are all filled in, I'm going to put some grease, of course, on the seal face itself. I never put seals in dry. And I made my own little seal driver. It's essentially like 2-inch ID ABS with a coupler at one end and then just a cap at the other, and then you can tap on this side to drive the seal in. Ideally it'd be a little bit bigger, but I'm just going to work with what this should be good enough, and just use that to drive the seal in like that. I'm on the left side of the tractor. Both seals are in. This is the outer one. There's an inner one. They're stacked. When I put the inner one in, I put it in and I get it as square as possible by hand. You know, push it in as far as I can. And then I use this dead blow hammer to just gently knock it in so it's square like it is now, until it gets to roughly, until it's tapped in as it is now pretty much, so these 2 surfaces are equal. And then I use this tool to hammer it in the rest of the way. This is the right side. The first seal is in. I'm about to drive in the second seal, and you can see the clearance here for the outer seal. I'm going to put that in now. And at that point, I'm going to level the tractor. I'm going to fill up the transmission and give it a day or 2 and see if it starts leaking anywhere. And if there's no problems, then I'll button it up and start putting the brake housing and the new friction discs on. Sorry for the noise in the background. It's been about 24 hours and the seals appear not to be leaking. I filled up the transmission for the rear end, and I don't see any leaking on either side. So I'm going to call this good. I'm going to start putting the housing and start putting this back together. For the past hour or so, I've been cleaning the housing. there was oil just everywhere, just saturated everywhere. So I think, you know, I think it was leaking out of the housing. So the oil was filling up, and I think it would probably got to about this level, because obviously the friction disc was soaked in oil, and I think it was either leaking out of this gasket or it was coming out of the linkage, the actuator rod on the other seal, this seal. I looked at the actuator on the non-leaking side, and it's absolutely spotless. So this one was totally soaked. I'm going to take it apart because I want to make sure I get all the, I think I'm going to put this on a belt sander and just get as much of this crud off as I can. And I'm going to take the springs apart because I want to go inside of it too, because I want to make sure that the ball bearings obviously this side probably isn't rusted. They're probably not rusted in place because they were soaked in oil, but I just want to get in and clean it up, make sure those ball bearings can move around, and I'll put the springs back on. This looks pretty tedious, and I couldn't get it off with just a spring puller, so the way I came up with it is just to put the Phillips head under where the spring ends, and then just pry it up, and then use this, just use a regular straight head to drive it off, like so. But when you're not holding the camera, it comes off quite easily. So, and at this point, there should be the ball bearings between them. So they look good. I'm just going to clean it a little bit and probably put a tiny bit of like moly grease in there, because the moly won't try and take off, and it won't underheat. Like, it's just thicker and it resists heat better, so it'll just do a better job in here and won't leak out onto the friction discs. So in this ramp mechanism, I went through and cleaned. There was some rust in these ramps. I don't know, you can kind of see how it ramps upward, and it does that so when you actuate it, it pulls the plates in opposite directions, which causes the whole assembly to become essentially wider and then push into the frictions. I don't see any pitting or anything or any of the balls. The balls all look good, but there was quite a bit of rust in here, which I've cleaned out. It's actually very smooth now. So that's how it is when the brakes are off, and then when you step on the pedal, the linkage pulls, and you can see that the assembly grows, and since there's a friction on either side, it essentially pushes one friction into the housing and then the other friction into the end plate. So that's how this works. So I'm reassembling the ramps with the ball bearings, and I'm using some moly, and I'm using just a little bit. As you can see, this stuff is grated. When it gets hot, it doesn't get runny and make a mess, and shouldn't come out onto the frictions. Should stay right where you put it. And I like using this stuff, the Bel-Ray. It's works really well. It works really well on the splines on the K-bike, things like that. So I'm gonna assemble these, put the springs back on. To get the spring back on, I put one of these down, because this will leave a gap here that'll allow you to get the bottom of the spring onto the hook. Right, there's not much clearance if you just put this down and then try and put the spring on. Not really enough room, so when I put these springs on, I kind of staggered the bottom of the spring, so there's this gap under there, and then I placed the spring in, and then with this finger I held it in place, and then I brought in, while I'm still holding it, I brought the tool, just this big screwdriver, essentially under this lip, underneath it, and then brought it up and pushed it against that surface right here, because then it just holds it in place. You can take your other finger out of the way and just lift it up, and then it'll pop right on. It's super easy. I think the key, though, is to get it elevated like I have it here with some gap. It just makes it easier to get the bottom of the spring onto that bottom tab. I'm putting the left side back together. So the housing is on with a new gasket. It's 4 bolts. Those are torqued. And then the inner friction is in with the rivet heads facing towards this ramp mechanism. So the plate in there is facing like this. That's the ramp mechanism, of course. And then this one is going to go rivets in like so. These have all been cleaned, greased. Cleaned. There's a little bit of moly on the pins, just a tiny bit. There's a tiny bit on the axle, just so everything's nice and smooth. It's really nice. Slides on good. And then the ramp mechanism, the ball bearings have all been cleaned, and all that has a tiny bit of moly as well. So everything should be able to move freely. I also put some on these. I think this ramp mechanism, when it's pulled forward, it moves separately from the friction. So I put a little bit on these surfaces, 1, 2, and 3, because that ramp mechanism just sits on that. And then when you actuate it, all that it does is, of course, come outward. You know, pushes, it widens and comes this way, and also goes inward. So that has a little bit of lube on it as well, not a lot. And the frictions can't touch it. You can see there's a gap there, so there's no way for the for any of that to get on the frictions. So I'm going to put the end cap on here, and at that point I'm going to go on the other side, get that done, and I'll do the linkages last. And everything looks good, nice and loose. Everything's moving freely. Should be really nice. Left side brake chamber is back together. I'm going to start the engine and turn the wheels and just get the brakes to seat. Make sure they're not too tight, because right now there's quite a bit of drag. I can't turn the axle by hand, which is fine, but I'm just going to start it. I'm going to finish the other side, then start the engine, let it run, let the brakes kind of get seated, and bed in a little bit, and make sure everything's okay before I go any further and put the linkage on and the platform, etc. So anyway, looking good. This is left side. I just need to do my test, then I'll fix that cotter pin and go from there. The left side, it's a little bit hotter, not too bad, but it's definitely a little bit warmer than the right side. The left side's done. All the linkages are on, cotter pins, the barb fittings in, so just going to button up the right side. Sorry for the noise in the background. There's a storm ripping through here pretty good right now. So I installed one of these barb fittings under the housing, and what I'm going to do is, whenever it's stationary in the shop parked, I'm just going to pull these little plastic caps off and let it drain. That way I get early warning if there's these seals or when these seals fail in the future. And then when I'm out using it out on the property, I'll just put this cap on it and leave it like that, and that should do fine. And it's pretty soft, very soft material, so if it gets hit, or it, you know, you hit a rock or a stick or something and it shears off, it's no big deal, because you just use an easy out to get it out. Ask me how I know. Before I mount the wheels, I chase the threads on the hubs here. With this tap and die set, just clean up those indexing bolts and then chase the threads on those holes for these bolts, and then clean up those bolts as well. Chase those as well. I'm going to probably use some medium strength Loctite or the equivalent to get, just to make sure that these bolts can't back out. And Yep, just going to run over to the right side now, finish that, and then I'll start mounting the wheels. So when it comes time to mount these big heavy wheels, I've got a little trick that works really well. First, it's good if you have you have bolts that are coming out that index like these do, where the bolts will come through and you'll have nuts to fasten to hold it in place. That's a good thing to do, even if temporarily, just to get the wheel mounted. But what I do, since it's single person and these wheels are so heavy, I make a stick like that, preferably a little bit longer, maybe 6 inches, a foot longer, but the same width, thin, and the same height would work fine. And what I do is I put that stick where the center of the contact patch would be when the wheel's in its normal position where it's mounted. And then, roll it up on the stick with not a bunch of negative or positive camber. Just try and get it as straight up as possible, as though it's going to be mounted. Check the center of the hub relative to the center of the wheel. Adjust that if necessary. And then if the indexing of the studs doesn't match the wheel holes, then you can just lift the wheel just a little bit and rotate it, because the stick, since it has virtually no resistance to the pavement, you don't have to fight the contact patch of the tire, right? If you weren't using the stick, you'd be either deadlifting it or trying to spin it on the pavement, and that's a recipe for a broken back. So by using the stick and then rotating it on the stick, you can get the centers, the indexing, as close as possible. And then once you do that, you can use the pry bar and it'll just pop right on. So it works really well if you're trying to do this by yourself. And then when it comes time to put the remaining bolts in, I like to take a slightly higher stick and that same pry bar, and I just use this to get these holes, make it easy to get the bolts in. Just push down with your foot and you can see the wheel starts to move. So it makes it much easier to get these bolts in because gravity's tugging on the wheel, so you're just pushing it back where it belongs. Seems like closed the toolbox. She knows that we're leaving. You want to go inside?